thank you for joining us for our second listening session regarding the Nickel Plate Trail proposal. I tonight have again with me Mike Corbett and Ty Mendenhall, and we're going to be kind of having a discussion with you and opening up the floor pretty early off the bat here to questions that any of you might have. So right now we should be live on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, Twitter. I've heard a lot of different places, and we also have a conference call. So if you're joining us by phone, you'll be able to kind of listen to what's going on here, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity for those of you that are joining us by telephone to ask questions as well. So as the night goes on, if you have the opportunity, feel free to share this information and the links to our live feeds on Facebook to your friends, anyone you can, so that we can get the message out. So since last time, there's been a few updates.
Yes, there have been.
I think there's always updates. There's not a day that goes by that something doesn't change with the nickel plate.
Very true. No, some really interesting things have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Most notably, last night our group attended the county council meeting, the Hamilton County Council meeting. We learned a lot, and I believe the councilors learned a lot out of that as well. And prior to that, what else have we had since then?
Well, the public comment period with the Surface Transportation Board is closed since the last time we did this, right? Yep. It was open at the time. Our understanding of that is that normally the Surface Transportation Board is basically a rubber stamp organization. They very seldom get much input from the public. When they open up these public sessions, they really do that because it's required. But in this case, they've gotten over 75 comments on their
over 100 today.
Over 100.
Yeah.
Wow. There's an update. Over 100 comments on this very issue, and that's thanks to the people who have stepped up and submitted their comments on the advantages of keeping the train, and really the way the process has not really worked out as well as it. Hasn't worked as well as it should when it comes to representing public input.
And we have some interesting parties that did comment to the Surface Transportation Board during this time period as well. I know one of was the Mayor of Logansport, and a couple who were a couple of the other notables that since the last time we've been on air.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, since the last time
we had keep track of time.
I know. We definitely. Yeah, we had the Mayor of Logansport. We had a homeowners association in Fishers that represents over 165 homes
on the tracks.
Yeah, that sit right next to the tracks, and they actually, surprisingly, they were in favor of keeping the rail. You know, we know a lot of times neighbors have some concerns, but even those that are directly adjoining the land were saying that it was in the community's best interest to look at saving this railroad. So pulling up the Surface Transportation Board here, we had the Indiana Landmarks, which looks at historical designation. They commented on it. The Hoosier Rails to Trails Council.
A couple of businesses
in
along
favor
the line.
Of rails, by the way.
Oh, yes, that's a good point. Hoosier Rails to Trails Council commented on this a couple times in favor of the rails, and also mentioning a lot of the concern with how the public officials have been handling this. But yeah, you were saying some businesses.
Some businesses along the line have indicated that they would be interested in keeping the train there as well, and that's important. The Surface Transportation Board is all about commerce and keeping commerce going along the rails. So having businesses step up, Kokomo Grain, I believe, is on there. Looks like the Quick Creek Company is on there.
Yep. Crown Technology, Stone Spectrum.
Yep. Had a number of businesses step up and speak up as well. So that's great. We appreciate that.
And Mike, one thing I'd like to add to that is a lot of confusion. From what I understand, is the word freight scares a lot of people.
Yeah.
They don't want freight trains barreling through here with 100 cars running at 60 miles an hour. But I believe what these businesses are looking for is more of what they would drop off a car and come back and pick one up, and it wouldn't be constant freight trains running through 4 or 5 times a day like some people in Fishers that work for the government have made you believe. So just wanted to clear that part up too. When we say freight, it's not what you think.
Well, and absolutely, the most important thing to see here is the level of interest. You know, this has been handled as if it's a line that should be discarded, and it is of no further value to the community. But you have interest from quite literally every area of the spectrum, whether it's trails groups, businesses, individuals, historical societies, the Preservation Alliance in Noblesville. I mean, there's interest all across the board on this, despite the fact that we've been told, oh, this is a this is an unused rail line that needs to be discarded. It's of no more use or value to us. So I think this clearly indicates there is a strong interest.
And most of these rails to trails, these episodes when they happen around the country happen because it's an abandoned rail line that hasn't been used for years. It's just sitting there and nobody's doing anything with it. And in those particular cases, you know, there's an argument to be made that you should turn a rail line into a trail. The problem is that that's not the case with this rail line. This particular railroad was being used until just a couple of years ago when the ITM, which had contracted to use it, was kicked off the rail line. It's interesting, you know, the mayor of Logansport did submit to the Surface Transportation Board. You know, for the past 2 years, we've not been able to enjoy the Polar Bear Express here in Hamilton County because the ITM hasn't been permitted to run it. Well, the Transportation Museum, like most businesses will, when you see your market going away, will go elsewhere. They want to go where they're perceived as being wanted. Yeah. And Logansport and Kokomo have opened their doors to them. In fact, I believe they're giving them a parade or something like that. They're going to have a parade up there. Yeah. They're going to operate the Polar Bear Express this year. So the residents in Howard County and I believe it's Cass County up there will get to enjoy that, and that's a loss for Hamilton County. We really want to make sure that it's not a permanent loss for us. We're working to try to make sure that we can get that back, and we can get the. I mean, the Polar Bear Express has been sold out for years, and they sell that out at like $35 a ticket, just because it's such a great family experience. It's a great amenity for Hamilton County, and we're seeing it go away, and it just breaks my heart.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that's important to mention is that this extends, the potential extends far beyond just what previously was there, the Polar Express, or Polar Bear Express, the State Fair train. I mean, they've been looking at trying to get all the way down to Indianapolis for Colts and Pacers games. And
oh yeah, how cool would that be?
Yeah, it'd be awesome to be able to railgate. Yeah, exactly, from as far north as Tipton all the way down to Indianapolis for these events. So we don't want to see leaders under misguided ideas direct this community in a place that residents don't necessarily want it to go. So I guess jumping forward to our most recent update with the Hamilton County Council meeting and some information pertaining to that, we did have the opportunity to address them. And Susan Miller from our group spoke, Mike Corbett and myself, and some of the issues that we touched on were the financial aspects of it. We requested that the council not fund anything else that's pertaining to the rails if it's going to ultimately lead to the destruction of that. And Mike, you covered some topics as well.
Well, just really talking about the whole business aspect of it. When you've got, and I alluded to this earlier when I was talking about the difference between an abandoned rail line and a working rail line. When you've got a business that's running on it and it's making money, the Transportation Museum and they will and themselves will admit that they've had some problems operating in the past, but they've always been able to maintain the rail and maintain their equipment with what they've been able to make. They've been making great strides in trying to improve their organization and making sure that some of the organizational problems they might have had in the past are being fixed. And when you have a business that's thriving, to be taking it off of a line like that and turning it into what basically is a liability. I mean, yes, the trail is going to be an amenity for residents of Fishers and Noblesville, but it's also going to cost money. In this particular case, the ITM and all of these excursion trains were not costing the public anything. It was paid for by user fees. People who enjoyed the excursion trains were willing to pay the freight, get on there, and ITM was able to make it go. So that I believe is just it's overreach by government that's inappropriate in this case. They need to let the free market operate there. That's
and I'd like to add to that, Mike, that even the group that has been authorized to come with a contract to operate north has asked the county for $750,000 already.
Well, yeah,
as a loan, but it's still one way or another, even if it's just for maintenance of the trail or this upcoming northern only train option. It's going to be money that's being spent from you guys if you're in any part of the county. It doesn't affect just Fishers or Noblesville. It's county-wide because usually things go over budget and they go into tax money, and it just trickles down from there, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's because the market is south. You know, that's where most people want to go. There are more things to do south of Noblesville than there are north of Noblesville and Fishers. And so it's natural that you're going to want, you know, that you want to go toward where the market is. And, you know, it doesn't take much to see the potential here. I mean, you don't have to really use your imagination to realize that a train full of Colts fans is going to be, you know, pretty valuable. You know?
Absolutely.
And they will use that rail line if, in fact, they're given the opportunity. You know, there's lots of opportunity going south, and not quite as much opportunity going north. I appreciate what they're trying to do with saving a little bit of the railroad north, but really most of the market is south, and the government would just get out of the way. I think we'd be able to see you know, a nonprofit in this case, you know, make a thriving business out of it again.
Absolutely. And there's something to be said for maintaining that connection. That, you know, having that connection from south to north could help to provide for more development and opportunities up north that aren't currently there. And you cut that off, you kind of eliminate that permanently.
Well, like with any transportation thing, the connectivity is everything. You know, you pull something out of the middle and you break that connectivity, it's lost a lot of value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you were you had discussed kind of that group running north as well, and you know, there's been a lot of ambition with that group, but we ultimately we just can't see that as being the final solution here. You know, it's not going to lead to the success of this corridor. So, going back to the meeting, the Hamilton County meeting, I think the most surprising thing we learned from that was the fact that the councilors were left just in the dark as the rest of the public was. And
that's almost a quote. I watched you guys on the live feed.
Yeah,
so yeah,
that was a direct quote. We knew nothing about this.
Right.
And they're 1/3 owners of the line, and they were not included or involved in that decision or discussion at all.
They're a little sore about that too.
Yeah, they are a little sore about that. Rightfully so, exactly. But taking that a step further, then they went on to explain that after they heard about this project, they requested a meeting. They called a meeting to try and get all of the owners and stakeholders to the table together, and no one showed up. The county councilors were all sitting there waiting for people to walk through the door, and they just stood them up. I mean, that is a very large and realistic concern that any resident and citizen should have of their government, is their inability to cooperate amongst each other. So that, you know, that's something to keep at the forefront. Something else that was very interesting, and this is a good point to bring up, this was handed to me at the meeting. It was actually some documentation provided by the Rails to Trails Conservancy that talks about rail banking. And one of the things that's prohibited when you rail bank a line is the construction of any permanent structures on the railroad right-of-way. So that leads to this question of how are they going to connect the trail north of 146th Street and south of 146th Street if they're not able to build a bridge.
So maybe that's why that's not in the quote for the budget either.
It might be. They received an estimate with that in there, but they, you know, they just kind of left that out.
Right, and they say the train's going to slow down traffic. What about a couple people pushing strollers across 146th Street or any other intersection? Not that that's a bad thing, but if that's what the argument needs to be, then, you know, flip-flop that around and we'll see what takes longer to cross the intersection.
Yeah, exactly. Well, any other updates that we can think of since the last time? I think we've pretty well covered it.
Ones,
yeah. Going back to the Surface Transportation Board, seemingly out of nowhere, two congressional representatives, responded to this in support of the trail. But the funny thing is they don't represent any district that's even around this area. One from Fort Wayne, the other one south from kind of the Bloomington, Greenwood, that area. So we're not sure how they got called into this and why they're so adamantly in support. We have our suspicions, but we'd like to see some representation locally because we know that they have heard from their citizens what the citizens want, which is keeping this rail. So I'd like to encourage any of you that have questions to submit those to us on our Facebook page. And I'll ask our producer back there if there's any questions that pop up on YouTube to send those our way as well. Any way you can think of. You can email them to us. I've got that pulled up here, or shout them across the room. But on Facebook, we'll be watching for questions as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we are coming to you live tonight from Hamilton County Television in Noblesville. Jim Wofford, who owns Hamilton County Television and Logan Street Signs and Banners, has graciously permitted us to use his studio here. It's very professional, and we're a little more comfortable now. I don't know if you were here for the last one. We were doing this on a laptop and sort of moving it around so that each of us could get on the screen from time to time. This is a much better setup. So we appreciate Jim doing that. We'll call him our sponsor.
Yes, thanks. And Noblesville Trophies as well.
Noblesville Trophies, that's right.
So we appreciate that. I'll keep my eye on Facebook here, and we allotted basically 30 minutes, and we're a little over halfway through that. But certainly, if we get more questions than we can answer in 30 minutes, we'll stay live with you to answer those questions. But looking back through some of the other details and developments of this project, what are some things that either of you could look towards and say, this is something that the public might want to know?
I would like the public to know something.
We do have a comment from Shannon Plummer.
Oh, okay.
She says, thank you for fighting so hard for the train. Will your plan include taking the train back up to Atlanta and Tipton?
Oh, okay. Well, Shannon, thank you. So the question was, if you couldn't hear that, will our plan include taking the train back up through Atlanta and Tipton? Absolutely. And that touches on a fantastic point. I believe I can speak for most of our group in saying that our vision minimally includes utilizing this line from Indianapolis to Tipton. And I say
and beyond, if we can get beyond, because it needs to be connected in Tipton, if I'm not mistaken, right? It's not connected right now?
Yeah, there's just a short expansive track that needs to be connected, and we can easily get up to Kokomo.
In fact, 4 of the 5 people proposed to offer stop right on the line had that in their offers, and the only one that didn't have that in their proposal was the one that was selected. So
Zane, he's asking, who kicked the ITM off the line?
Oh, thank you, Zane, for asking that question. I'm going to answer this as quickly as we can here, because this is really the premise of the whole reason why the rail line isn't running, and it is a false premise. There's no other way to say that. There was, some of this is history we don't like going into, but there were some volunteers that were concerned about the way that ITM was running, and they wrote a letter and submitted that to the Hoosier Heritage Port Authority and others. And the Port Authority manages the operation of the rail line on behalf of the owners, which are Fishers, Noblesville, and Hamilton County. So the Port Authority, rightfully so, that they should have, receiving a letter alleging safety issues, they suspended the operations to investigate. But there's where the problem starts, is that suspension was never lifted despite the efforts to try and bring that line back into service. And there's too much evidence to try and go over here today, but here are the facts. There's 5 reports from the Federal Railroad Administration that happened after this allegation that said that there were no violations on the track. There was also a private report that was paid for by the Port Authority, which said in the first paragraph in the executive summary, this is one of the best 37 miles of railroad that this consultant has ever seen. It is in excellent condition, high and dry. All the steel components, rail, turnout, ties are in good to fair condition. So your question, your guess is as good as ours as far as well, we know who kicked them off. It was the Port Authority, but why that suspension remained, there's a lot of conjecture there.
Zane, we're trying to understand the motivation behind this, because it's not entirely clear. And actually, in an effort to do that, we have made public records requests, and you can do that to your local authorities, your local municipal government. You go through a little process there, and you say, we would like to get some records that contain, meaning emails and so forth, that contain certain keywords. So that you can, keep an eye on what your elected officials are doing. Frankly, Noblesville has been pretty cooperative in that regard. Yes. We sent out a records request within a couple of weeks. We get all the records back. We go through them. And I think, we kind of have a general idea of why Noblesville decided they wanted to do this. We don't necessarily agree with it, but we understand why they did. It's been a lot harder with Fishers. We have...
I'd venture to say almost impossible.
Okay, impossible.
I can go with that.
And Tyler's the one that actually has been submitting the request. And you initially submitted the first one when, Ty?
Oh, well, the first one was back in
June,
I want to say June.
June.
Well, somewhere around that time frame, and finally they got back to us after a couple issues there. And we're learning as we go on certain things, but most recently, we submitted a request for emails between Scott Fatness, 4 people, and about 8 keywords. And that was only from a date span of February 1st to September 1st. And this was submitted on September the 7th, and they have not been able to come up with those emails in that amount of time. And
so nearly 2 months ago.
It's just
unbelievable. Has gone by,
unbelievable.
and we just can't seem to get the emails, because we would like to understand what the motivation is here. You know, when you look at it from the outside, and once again you look at this, you know, a thriving excursion line, and all of a sudden your city leaders say, "Well, we don't want that anymore. Now we want a trail." Even though it's a business that has been ongoing and continues to serve the with for something that obviously there's a market for, and government wants to kick it off. Why do they want to do that? Why would government want to do that to a local business? And we don't really understand that. So that's part of our motivation, to try to get these documents so we can figure out what's going on.
Sure. We have another question.
We have another question. It's from Keith King. He said, "I understand there's no money was factored for trailheads. Is that true?"
Correct, yes. In the estimate that was received, it clearly specifies down below. First of all, if you factor in the bridge that they're going to need over 146th Street, the actual estimate is about $13.3 million for the trail. And that's a minimum because of a little footnote that says trailheads, benches, you know, lights, whatever you need. A lot of that has not been factored into the cost estimate. So this is going to end up costing the trail, if it succeeds, will cost the community a lot more than what's been publicized about it. So.
And that's when they'll come to the county and ask for more money,
Exactly.
Taxpayer money, being part of that. So it's kind of just gets out of hand pretty quick.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem fair or right that
Especially if you don't want it.
No, but that the administrative branch can commit 3 municipalities to this plan and in a sense obligate them to these expenses without having their input included first. But we know that if that trail goes through, there's going to be all these expenses which will have to be covered.
It affects you whether you're on the railroad line or not. And smaller issues have always had the opportunity, or not always, but have had the opportunity to be brought to a vote, like a referendum. Usually when it involves taxpayer money, which it certainly will one way or the other.
Sure.
Even an informal, I don't know where they're getting their numbers that we are right here and you guys watching us and the 10,000 on the petitions, we're the silent or vocal minority, I should say.
Vocal minority.
Vocal minority.
We're not silent. Definitely not that.
That's another point, I guess, that I'd like to bring up, is that because a lot of people, we've been doing this since like February is when they had the first when they first brought up the idea of putting in the trail. So it's been 10 months now, and a certain amount of fatigue sets in, and people think, well, it's a done deal, and the city wants you to think it's a done deal.
They're counting on it.
Yeah, it's not, and that's why we keep talking about it. The reason we keep going back to these meetings and trying to get our elected officials to respond. Jim looks like he's got another question.
We have another question from Brandon Willis.
Uh-huh.
When can we expect some dialogue from the STB?
That's
a good point. That's a good question. I don't know. Do we know?
We don't. Our group actually filed. It ended up going in today. I thought that had gone in yesterday, but we filed a motion to suspend and investigate the proceeding. At this point, it's really in their hands, and we hope that they're. We'd like to see some expediency in this as well, but only if that means that they're expediently getting through every single comment and reading it and factoring it in. But we have no expectation as to when. It could be tomorrow, it could be a year from now. I mean, it's their timeline, really.
Right, and for those of you that didn't know, the attorney for Fishers actually wrote the Surface Transportation Board and asked them to fast-track it and to disregard many comments from people that are associated with saving the railroad tracks, and to kind of overlook a few rules and fast-track the whole operation. So that's where we're coming from, trying to put the brakes on it so people can actually have time to look at everything if need be. And I know they really don't have a legal time frame that I know of that they have to make a decision. So
are they still taking comments? They're not taking public comments, right?
Technically, as far as the Office of Proceedings has let us know, every comment that comes in, until the board specifically states no more comments, even though they've already set a deadline, they will accept it, and it'll be up to the board's discretion as to whether or not that will be considered in their decision. So if you feel so inclined and you'd like to submit a comment, you can go to the Surface Transportation Board's website and submit it in reference to docket number FD 36137-0.
Jim.
We have another question from Brenda Cook. Do you have a legal team helping you navigate the government red tape?
Now, that is another excellent question. We do get sparse amounts of legal advice from various places. We have a very seasoned and experienced team of people that work behind us and kind of provide guidance. But when we actually went to seek out an STB-specific lawyer, we all kind of choked when we heard that it was $545 an hour. And we've got some money. We've had such a generous level of support from all of the residents that want to see this saved.
Thank you, by the way.
Yes,
absolutely.
and thank you for that. It's made a tremendous impact and allowed us to do a lot of things, but one of which, unfortunately, has not been the lawyer because
we only buy about an hour or two of the lawyer.
We could get an hour or two of the lawyer. So there's a lot to be said for research, and we have a number of us that are highly dedicated to getting our heads sunk into reading documentation, looking at past cases, reading through the documentation and the literature, and kind of helping us to understand how to navigate those waters.
Yeah.
I have another question. Not sure what this is about. Keith wants to know what's going on with the lawsuit with lawyers in Missouri and the rail banking that's representing property owners.
That's another good question.
Well, I actually went to one of those sessions. I was invited there by one of the landowners who said, "Hey, why don't you come hear what they have to say?" And essentially, that it's kind of a whole separate issue. These lawyers do this all over the country because these kinds of rail-to-trail things are happening all over the country. And it turns out that when the federal government decides to change the use of any kind of land that they own, because a lot of these railroads run on easements. So if people have an adjacent property and the railroad took out an easement to be able to run on it, if the government then goes in, the federal government goes in and changes the use of that, supposedly they owe money. The federal government then owes money to that particular landowner. So these legal teams specialize in that. They go all over the country and go to all of these landowners and go, you got to be part of this class action lawsuit in order to get any money. If you don't come along with us, you're not going to get any money. But the big thing to keep in mind on that is that nothing happens until the Surface Transportation Board rules. So until they've said that rail banking is going to be is actually going to happen, none of these. So what they're doing is preparing all of these people. If and when rail banking happens, it will trigger all of these lawsuits that these legal teams are going to be filing on behalf of adjacent landowners. However, local governments do not pay any of that. It all happens through the federal government. It's paid by the federal government. Apparently, there's a court just for federal claims, and these people have an office right next to the court, and they get the thing together, and they go into the court, and they get all this money. It's a pretty interesting way to make a living, I'm sure.
Sounds lucrative.
It does.
But yeah, if you weren't able to hear that question, there is a law firm that's been throughout the community contacting adjacent landowners, and you probably saw in the IBJ, the Indiana Business Journal, that there was a lawsuit pending on this, but that won't affect the outcome at all. That's really not directed at all at what the cities are doing. Yeah, it's separate. It's really just a way for, if the rail banking is approved, for adjacent landowners to make some money off that through the federal government. So that doesn't really affect our progress here. Do we have any more questions back there?
Excuse me.
It says, how would that affect the mayors?
Well, if we're talking in regards to that same question, it won't affect their agenda or what they're moving forward with, but what is interesting is that there was an email that Deputy Mayor Steve Cook sent out to the Port Authority and county or city councilors, and it was kind of explaining all this and saying, hey, don't worry, we're not going to have to pay any of that money. That's a federal takings claim. But that's still not responsible government. Yeah, I understand locally you're not going to be paying that, but that's still an increased tax dollar expense to this trail, and you're paying it through your federal income tax, if not through, income versus property tax. I mean, you're paying it one way or the other. So
Yeah.
it's not a responsible way to look at it. But on top of that, there in that email, this thought process was explained that the whole process for rail banking is to mitigate the effects and the costs, financial costs of building a trail on local governments, and that's not at all what rail banking was created for. It was actually specifically to help save railroad corridors that were being abandoned left and right back when the Staggers Act passed, and that allowed railroads to do that. Previously, they were all highly regulated by the government, and then the Staggers Act went through and allowed them to actually start divesting themselves of this land. But then private companies were doing it so fast that the federal government became concerned and said, we need to do something. So we're going to create this Rails to Trails Act. And anyway, it's been misinterpreted by city leaders pretty severely. So hopefully, people can understand the difference there. It is actually to protect railroad corridors.
Right.
Do we have any other questions? I know we're pretty much at the end of our 30 minutes, so if you don't have
a little bit over. We could talk about this forever, but you probably don't want us to.
But definitely feel free to email us, info@savethenickelplate.org. Like us on Facebook. It's just facebook.com/savethenickelplate. And stay in contact with us. We'd be happy to provide any answers that we have. One thing I haven't done here, we've got a few individuals on our conference call. I'll see one at a time since there's not many here if there's any questions. So I've got, let's see here. I don't know who I have, so we'll just kind of play this back and forth.
Wait, can I do it? Caller, you're on the air.
That's right. We don't know who you are, but you're on the air. We do have an individual on the air. Actually, I'll tell you what. I'll just unmute all of you here. If any of you have questions that are listening on the phone, feel free to speak up and ask a question. Any questions? No, they all go silent.
Apparently
no one wants to talk live. That's okay.
Logan.
Yo, yes.
Logan.
Hello, caller.
Recognize that name.
Would you please repeat the questions when they are asked? Because sometimes the voices are highly quiet when they ask the question. So please repeat. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think it is a good point. We tried to repeat a couple of them. Unfortunately, I think we're pretty far behind on getting back to those. But a lot of the questions are just pertaining to this lawsuit, what we hope to see with the trail. Are we going to use it all the way to Tipton? The answer was yes. I'm trying to think of any other questions we had.
The producer doesn't have a mic. That's the problem.
Yeah, our producer. We failed to provide a microphone to our producer. So, but we'll certainly look at trying to schedule another one of these in a month or so.
Hopefully there'll be some more things happening between now and then. I'm sure there will. Something happens. It seems like every few days on this. And we'll give you an update, try and keep you updated as much as possible. But be sure to send an email if you have any questions about this, or if you have a group and you'd like one of us to come out and talk about it.
Absolutely.
I mean, we'd be happy to do that.
Absolutely.
Send us an email as an info@savethenickelplate.org.
You got it.
And we'll get somebody out there to talk to you about it and find out more about have you find out more about how you can get involved.
Absolutely. Homeowners associations, businesses, you name it.
Yep.
We'd be happy to. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight and staying tuned in. If you have questions after this, you can leave them as a comment to this video. It should reappear as a pre-recorded or a recorded live stream, and you can ask us questions there. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.